Mozet, and welcome to Winner Take All, where we talk about the constant battle to fight back and win against big tech. Very excited to have Sultan Meghji with us here today. Sultan is the former Chief Innovation Officer at the FDIC. He is also a Fintech entrepreneur and also professor at Duke University. So you got a few things going on. Sultan, thanks so much for making the time and joining us here today.
Well, thanks for having me, Alex. I'm excited to be here.
You wrote this article in Bloomberg, Why I Quit as FDIC Innovation Chief. Agencies that protect the U.S. financial system assume that 20th century rules can be jury-rigged to cover 21st century technology. And this thing got a lot of attention. Could you tell us about it? What were you doing at the FDIC, and what's some of the story behind why you decided to put this op-ed together?
I've worked around the U.S. government and a bunch of different regulatory agencies for better than 20 years, from my time working on the New York Stock Exchange to being in biotech and then to being in fintech and banking. And the farther we get into the 21st century, a couple of things really have popped for me. And it's one of the reasons why I joined the FDIC. Was the first is, the technology is moving so quickly and it's advancing at such a pace, and it's not coming through the traditional channels. We don't, 30 years ago, the joke was you couldn't get fired for hiring IBM. Well, now you can absolutely get fired for hiring IBM. In fact, you probably should be fired for even considering it in most cases. And the technology is just moving so quickly, and it's coming from smaller companies. It's coming from companies with 20, 30, 40, 50 people, because the tooling has gotten better. The overall technology is just moving so rapidly. The second is the legal and statutory systems that most of the government operates inside of, predate, most of the technologies we're talking about. In the banking system is a great example. We have something like 4,500 banks in this country, a slightly larger number of credit unions, and the vast majority of the systems they use to, keep account of, your checking account and your car loan and your mortgage are, most of the time from pre-2008, in many cases before the year 2000. And so you have a huge technical debt that sits inside of the system. And so one of the things that got my attention and why I joined the government was to specifically look at ways of accelerating the ability of the government to not just respond to new technologies and the opportunities and threats that come from that, but also to get proactive. There are a lot of technologies that are coming that, the government is just completely unprepared for, especially as it relates to, kind of protecting the normal lives of the average American, whether it's the advent of artificial intelligence, which has obviously gotten in the news quite a bit recently, cyber crime, cyber terrorism, but then also things like cryptocurrencies and Web3 and quantum computing. These are all things that are coming far faster than most people realize. And, the government doesn't generally have the people, the processes, or the technologies in place to deal with that. And so that's why I joined. And it was an absolutely fascinating journey. I would never take away that experience, but also I think very quickly, for someone who's used to working in the private sector and in academia, the government is, slow as molasses would be a positive way to talk about it.
It's funny. I was reading this interview with this guy named Josh Wolf, who founded this VC firm called Lux Capital. And Josh and Lux have made a big push to get into defense and government, right? Like bringing tech innovation and investment into, these spaces that, as you're saying, right, have been just so archaic. And I was reading this article. This is his quote. "If I were an enemy mole in the Pentagon, instead of stealing anything that you guys are developing, I would make sure that you did nothing to your systems," Wolf told them, "because they're that bad."
This is a great example. And I kind of agree with that quote. This is a perfect example of where, we are using 20th century thinking in a 21st century environment. And my comment about tooling really applies here. So let's just say that you are in a massive procurement part of the US government, and you're used to buying $50 million fighters, and you're used to running these big multi-billion-dollar acquisition contracts, right? Great, but that's not how you buy cybersecurity technology in 2021. Right. It's a totally different process you need. It's a totally different skill set you need. The procurement people aren't equipped to analyze the different offerings out there. And so guess what? We buy technology in the US government as if we were buying large scale military hardware. And that's not how you do it. And there have been some innovations, at FDIC. I helped roll out a rapid prototyping program. We started doing tech sprints. We started doing other things to kind of get small business engaged, get academia more engaged. But at the end of the day, the procurement systems are not designed for that. They want to write the massive contract to the massive tech company, to the massive consulting firm, and you see kind of all the bad behavior associated with that. And so what ends up happening is you have these massive technical infrastructures that are very static and stay static for decades. The NOTAM system from FAA, which has been in the news quite a bit recently, is kind of a big deal, right? It was installed in the early 90s. They aren't even thinking about rolling out a new version of it for another 5 years, at which point everyone involved in the process will be retired. And so all they've done is kick the can down the road. And you see a lot of that.
I heard, by the way, do you think this is fake news? That you see this rumor, because we were talking about crypto before we jumped on here, that system was actually hacked and the US government was being held hostage and then had to buy crypto to pay off the hackers?
I've heard some great stories in my life. That one seems pretty far out there. Maybe not quite all the way to I'll sell you a bridge in New York, but it seems pretty close. I've heard that from a few. There was a certain Fox News host who tried to sell that story last week, and I think the math doesn't work on that one, I don't think.
So you're inside the FDIC. You were there for a little over a year, and you were trying to make these changes, and right, you were just meeting blockers and hitting walls at every step of the way, or?
Yeah, the way I've been talking about it is there are kind of three things going on. So first off is when I went in, I worked with the chairman. I worked with kind of a cross political, apolitical group of people to try to put a list together of things that we wanted to accomplish in my tenure there. And because I'm used to, working in highly accountable environments, it's pretty simple. You say you're going to do 10 things, you do 10 things, right? So we came up with a list of things to do. And some of the things we got done very quickly. We radically improved our ability to engage with the community. We radically improved the end user technology set that the average staff member was using. We got them out of the mid 2000s and got them into at least the early 2020s, right? We made a lot of good progress. There's a lot of policy work, a lot of good cybersecurity work that we got done. So that was great. Lots of great forward potential in areas that were, kind of critical, if you will. The interesting thing is, just as there were things that went very, very well, there were things that didn't. An example would be, I am used to, in organizations, giving people the opportunity to cheerlead their own organization. So, maybe you get a sweatshirt with the logo of your organization, or you get a coffee mug or something like that, right? Literally the entire time I was a federal employee, I was working through the process of trying to get better swag available to FDIC employees. And it was blocked on a daily basis by a bunch of lawyers because for whatever reason, they didn't think it was a good idea. But because there's no accountability, no one ever said, I am Joe and I don't want you to do this, and here is why. It was, somebody told another lawyer, told another lawyer, told another lawyer, and then the process just stalled for 6 weeks, right? So you had that kind of stuff as well. And the third is, it is nearly impossible in Washington, D.C. to not be part of a, very aggressive, very confrontational political process between two parties that fundamentally have no desire to work together in many cases. And I was at a senior enough level that, I ended up spending, the vast majority of my time, in fights that had absolutely nothing to do with making the banking system safer or making the US a more strategically important financial capital in the world or anything like that. It was much more make one party feel good, make another party feel bad, and stuff like that. And for normal people like me who don't live and die by an individual party, it was a little frustrating.
And, these are agencies, right, which are supposed to be apolitical, right, not get swept up into partisan politics and all that stuff. But you can kind of see that seeping into something like you wouldn't think the FDIC is,
hyper political.
Yeah.
Well, I think in the 2020s, it will certainly, let's say in the 21st century, I can't think of a single part of the U.S. government that isn't fundamentally political in nature. The last chairman left because of a political fight, because, you had a board and, you had fundamentally a disconnect between the two parties and kind of a big fight that ended up with her resigning. And, that's fine. That's the political process. That's what we've, kind of all agreed to do. But we need to accept the fact that not only do you have, party A and party B and all the gray area amongst the extremes and the centrists on both sides, but then you also have a third group, which is the kind of lifetime bureaucrats. And, it's not really an A versus B group. It's an A versus B versus C fight, right? So it's like a tripod, and tripods are pretty unstable in some cases.
So, you were talking about the inability to bring new thinking into this kind of digitally connected 21st century economy. One of the things that I feel like, not squarely from the FDIC, but, this one coming from the Fed, not actually a part of the government technically at all. But, I know you were collaborating with folks at the Fed, right? So, I feel like probably one of the biggest kind of quote unquote digital things is this idea of the Fed launching a digital currency. Is that something that A, you had any familiarity with? B, you haven't, is that something that you feel like, a digital currency, like hopefully you'd have some smart people like working on that to make sure that doesn't get messed up. But do you have any exposure to that and any opinions on what's going on with that initiative?
Yeah. So, obviously, I've been very aware of what we call Project Hamilton, which was a collaboration between part of the Federal Reserve System and MIT to build a test system for a central bank digital currency. Obviously, very familiar with that. There is a significant debate in the federal regulatory community about the value of a central bank digital currency, vis-a-vis a stable coin in particular. That's a big debate right now. So a stable coin would be a digital currency that is pegged to the US dollar, that is used by banks as an interbank payment system, a wholesale system, right? A central bank digital currency would be the system by which the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve banks move money from the Federal Reserve into those banks. So it would go from a central bank digital currency to a stable coin and then go through the banks and then live in the banking system exactly as we have money today. Okay, that's the structure that the vast majority of people in the federal government think should happen. And, they've got their sponsors in the private sector who are building versions of stable coins already. And there are a couple out there and, all that good stuff. The use cases for a central bank digital currency are kind of problematic at the central bank level for the United States because of how our central bank is organized. We don't have a central bank like the British do or the Germans do or, any of the other major industrialized countries. We have a Federal Reserve Board that is a policy engine that is a separate, technically part of the executive branch, but not. There's kind of a debate about that. There's actually a lawsuit about that right now that's really worth paying attention to. And then there are 12 individual Federal Reserve banks all over the country. And those are the ones that actually operate the money. And it is very unclear as to whether or not any of the payments infrastructure that currently exists, some of which is incredibly old and very insecure, can be replaced by a central bank digital currency because there is no program yet. They shut down Project Hamilton. It was an interesting case study, but not a piece of reusable technology. It's kind of slow and clunky and a bunch of other stuff. It's not something that could even replace what was currently in the system right now. And so the question, and in the midst of all of this, there's a new Fed payment system that they've been working on for a decade that's about to roll out in the next year or two. So the question is, what are the use cases? What's the value? What's going to happen? My own personal opinion is I would not rely on a U.S. central bank digital currency happening anytime soon. And I think if you're thinking about doing anything in the space that requires the existence of that, go find something else to do for a couple of presidential elections.
You talk about technological transformation of America's financial system, focusing on modernization and confronting threats from, folks like Russia and China. The thing that I saw with the fallout from Russia and the war and their invasion of Ukraine was, yes, our banking system left Russia. Great. We want to penalize Russia. Horrible thing that they've done. But at the same time, you've now created a vacuum in Russia that China has conveniently filled with their banking infrastructure. And now we've actually brought these two, frankly, enemies of ours much closer together in a variety of ways, financial infrastructure just being one of them. Any areas that you see Russia and China or others kind of out innovating us in the sense of financial modernization and these kinds of areas?
Wow, that's an incredibly broad question, Alex. Let me break it up into a few parts for you. So first off, the U.S. is still the financial backbone of the entire world. It's still 57% or something like that. Check my math on that. According to the IMF, of global reserve currency is the U.S. dollar. So that's the fundamental blood that makes the global economy operate. Right. That number is going down. It used to be as high as 80%, and it just keeps kind of slowly getting chipped away. And there are a couple of reasons. One of them is the lack of financial innovation here in the United States, whether you're talking at the central bank level, at the, kind of GSIB normal bank level, or all the way down to, consumer finance. We are not leading in those spaces. We have most of the capital, we have the payments rails, but that's really it. So there is a tremendous amount of interesting innovation happening going on outside the United States. In fact, when I look for interesting financial innovation, I generally look outside of the United States first. Just as a hey, I want to hear about the coolest new stablecoin thing. It's not going to be here in the US. It'll be somewhere else. Might not be Russia or China. In fact, in most cases, it's neither Russia or China. It's somewhere like, the UAE or Africa or Singapore or parts of Europe. Estonia is doing some really interesting work. ECB's got some interesting policy work going on. Like there's some good stuff. There's some stuff in Central America. There's some stuff in Philippines. There's activity there, and it's non-geographic in nature. It's, people with an idea working together across borders, right? So that's kind of the first part trying to answer your question. The second is, the vacuum comment, I agree with completely, by the way. We, by removing ourselves from the global stage, make it easier for others to work against us. And let's be real, most people want to work against us, right? It's like nobody wants the US to be in charge. Nobody wants the US to be there. They always want to do a little bit more. And, Russia and China are two great examples. The war crime of Russia invading Ukraine, which I cannot be more strongly against that. And I really feel like we should be stronger. Like I want more tanks. I think this is kick them out of Crimea and let's get on with the rest of the century. Right. It has caused what is to me one of the most terrifying financial innovations that we've seen, which is the creation of a stable coin backed on gold by the Russians and the Iranians to do payments for energy that bypasses the rest of the global economy. If they can actually prove that and get that operating and do that kind of stuff, where they have now gone back to pre-fiat currency, asset-based currencies. So we went off of, gold standard in 1972. If they can figure out how to make that a functional operation with a digital payments layer, with a strong asset sitting underneath it, with a digital payments infrastructure around it, and do it in a way that's kind of reasonably straightforward and reasonably cost efficient, that's a terrifying standard to set, because then all of a sudden there'll be 500 of them. And it won't be long before it's oligarchs hiding yachts and, narco terrorists and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard doing terrible stuff, and you and I are recording this on the Holocaust Remembrance Day, right? And the fact is that when you hear about financial innovation coming from Iran, which has a specific desire to wipe Israel off the face of the planet, like that's a terrible thing. We don't want to enable that kind of behavior, whether it's at a macro level for the state of Iran or at the tactical level with, terrorist organizations.
I mean, yeah, the decoupling of making your payments for energy and oil and moving that off of these existing Fed or US-backed financial systems is something that I know not just Iran, right, but China and all those actors have long openly professed is a priority goal of theirs.
Let's be completely real about this. One of the reasons the US was so dominant in the 20th century after the Second World War was because we owned the financial rails and we owned the telecommunication rails, right? AT&T built the technology. Motorola built the technology. You wanted to use a phone in any country in the world, you were touching American technology. That was American innovation, and it was valuable to us from a monetary perspective, but also from a political and diplomatic perspective, right? That has fallen away very quickly. Every single device that you and I are using to talk to each other, the number of them made or designed in the United States is tiny, right? Look at where it's made in, my phone is made in China, my laptop is made in Taiwan, or I should say People's Republic of China versus Republic of China, just to annoy my friends in the Chinese Communist Party, right? But we're not building that in the US anymore, right? And so the telecommunications infrastructure has kind of faded away. I loved it when we saw a bunch of democracies working on this together, right? You'd see, German technology, American technology, British technology, Western European, all the D20 countries working together. That's great. Japanese technology, fantastic, right? The fact is, though, we're now at a point where that's not where it's mostly being designed, mostly being built. I think this is one of the reasons why the CHIPS Act is so important, right? We still own the keys to the kingdom on chip design and how to build the machines that build chips. That is still a Western democratically owned, IP base. We have to maintain that, and we have to start moving that manufacturing back into democracies. And we need to make that happen. So as we look to the 21st century, we need to reclaim telecommunications. We need to reestablish financial innovation on Western values, on Western rails. And we then have to then use that to create social impact like we did as well. I was very lucky. I grew up in Western Europe as the Berlin Wall was coming down. I got to be there when they took down Checkpoint Charlie. Well, that was all about Levi's and Marlboros. Like, that's how you won the hearts and minds of Eastern Europe and the Soviets, which then allowed us to win the Cold War. Right now, TikTok, Snapchat, the things that really define the social constructs for the younger generations are all run out of China with a fundamentally Chinese philosophy of centralization, data capture, and monetization built around it. Yeah, we don't have something similar to that on the Western side.
I mean, we talk about this stuff on the show all the time, right? The need to get smart about banning TikTok. Now it feels like there actually is more bipartisan support for it. But yeah, I mean, it's still here. It's still operating, right? And we are just so sluggish to do anything and to take any action.
This is exactly one of the reasons why I was happy for my time in government, but realized there was far more I could do outside the government that could actually get things moving faster. And, being an advisor to America's Frontier Fund, which is very much about bringing semiconductor manufacturing back to the United States, being in the venture space, specifically investing in financial innovation here. I'm sitting in New York right now, having just spent the morning, meeting with really awesome American innovators who are trying to think about what we can do to modernize and secure the financial system far more than it's currently done. This is a great thing for me to be spending my time on. But, the US government is just really culturally not wired to do a lot of this stuff. I am incredibly hopeful that it is. I still participate in a lot of those activities. I fundamentally support them. But you also have to understand that, our society needs to execute far more quickly than the US government is currently capable of doing.
I don't know how you change it. I don't know how you fix it. It's just such a behemoth juggernaut.
Yeah. I mean, Alex, so here's the thing. I was deep into my 40s before I worked for the US government. And I have to tell you, most of the people I know who go to work for US government go right out of school, and they spend a couple years in there and they get frustrated. They can't get promoted fast enough. They see all their friends making more money, and then they leave and, go on to the private sector. And then they forget about that experience. It's a cool little thing on the resume, but that's about it. I really think that every single person who cares about an industry like this, or cares about tech, or cares about finance or life sciences or whatever, find a way every decade or so to go into the US government for a year or two, or go into an NGO for a year or two. 10 years ago, I went into an NGO for 18 months and did, basically fintech innovation in Africa. Okay. It was absolutely amazing. Got to see a whole lot of amazing work, got to meet amazing human beings doing awesome stuff, got to see an entirely different way of operating that fundamentally was focused not on me making money, but on having a positive impact in the community, right? That's how I think about my time at FDIC. And, at some point I'll probably go back to the US government if they'll have me. I don't know. The op-ed might've made that hard, but I'll do that. But I do think everyone should do it at a couple of points in their career, because that's how you start getting that cultural change. And you start bringing in people at every arc of their life with their different experiences, different values. And it's a far more equitable, far more diverse community than what we currently have right now. The communities in the federal bureaucracy aren't exactly diverse.
It's just kind of the good people just have natural attrition. And, what are you left over with? You can't fire anyone.
Tell me about it.
You're kind of stuck. Were you able to fire anyone while you were, in there? If you wanted to?
I laugh. So obviously I'm still governed by, confidentiality and a bunch of stuff. I will tell you that there was a situation where we discovered bad behavior in an employee. I was not directly involved in this. I just discovered, I was told about it kind of after the fact, over the water cooler. And it was someone who, in any other situation, not only would I have fired them, but I would probably have called the police on them. And that person was not fired. You did not call the police on this person. And this person still works there. I'm to this day, I'm blown away by it. And if I'm ever allowed to talk about this story, I will, because it just makes no sense to me whatsoever.
And then, by the way, everyone now knows about this, and it normalizes the behavior. We talk about right. You're also an entrepreneur, and you're doing a bunch of cool things. And I mean, you think about culture. You talk about like, a virus, right? If you have a virus that spreads through your culture. Well, that's an example of a really kind of fatal virus where you can not only have misconduct, but misconduct which could be criminal, but you still have a job. Maybe you were reprimanded, but really nothing happened. And I guarantee that's happened probably hundreds of thousands of times or millions of times. I don't know how many times, but it's just, how do you actually do anything? I love your idea. Hey, come spend a couple of years kind of, it's giving back, right? I mean, that's really what Congress was in the early days. Hopefully we could bring back term limits, or bring term limits in. But yeah, the idea was I go to DC, I do my time, and then I go back. Versus now
it's not. Yeah, it's almost like a whole little caste system that's been created. But I'll tell you, if someone is listening to this and they're kind of intrigued by this part of the conversation, and they're let's say, not right out of school, and they're thinking about ways of potentially jumping in and looking, I'm going to suggest two things. Okay, first off is pay attention to the federal registrar and sign up and get the alerts when agencies ask for something called an RFI. That's a request for information. I can tell you, I put out a bunch of RFIs when I was inside, and I looked at every single one. And it didn't matter if it was written by a guy in crayon who just was ranting from the top of a mountain, or from a major public company or whatever. Not every, lead person in an agency or deputy or whatever will do that. But like I did, and I knew a lot of people did, because they wanted that perspective. And so I would say if anybody does that and they hear about something they're interested in, maybe it's, there's an RFI out right now from Office of Science and Tech Policy about digital assets, because they're starting to think about putting that agency together. Like, put your thoughts in there. Write up a well-done couple-page memo. It doesn't need to be more than that. Write up a couple of thoughts. Highlight one thing that you think is interesting. So that's number one. Number two is look at the Presidential Innovation Fellow Program. It is an absolutely amazing program run out of the White House. It is a nonpartisan group. It brings in some of the most amazing people, kind of mid-senior in their career, who just want to take a year or two and come in and help out. Every single person I've interacted with from that program has been fantastic. And it's a way for someone to jump in without, a massive bureaucratic program and all this kind of stuff. You're never going to make an amazing salary, but guess what? It's still better than, 50 grand a year. And you could do some real work and have a real impact. PIFs, we call them PIFs, Presidential Innovation Fellows, disproportionately got to do the interesting stuff and disproportionately got to play at a more senior level because of the quality of the people that they brought in. So I would say if you're interested in that, absolutely do that.
Yeah, those are great, very tangible suggestions. I'm looking at the PIFs now.
It is such a cool program. The people are amazing. It's like, it is absolutely something anybody who is taking the energy to listen to a podcast like this should put on their radar.
It comes in at the White House, but then you get to interact with all the various agencies as a result. So what are you doing now, right? You said, hey, I got to go back into the private world. I can make real change there.
So I'm doing a couple of things. So first off, I've moved over. I'm a professor in the graduate school at Duke University, Pratt Engineering School, and I'm helping them to build and teach classes focused on Web3, cybersecurity, and artificial intelligence. I've been in artificial intelligence and cyber for a really long time. Web3, obviously, for a little over a decade now. And it's really about making sure that our educational system is modern. And it's making sure that the students going through some of the best universities in the country are learning the best stuff and getting access to, the right things. So I'm spending a decent amount of time on that. I also have the opportunity to advise a number of younger companies, a couple of bigger companies, but then also help guide investment in really two big areas. One is financial innovation, and the other is what I would call industrial technology. And so, semiconductors is a big piece of that, fusion, quantum, these are other areas we're working on. And the idea is to recreate the post-World War II industrial boom with a digital lens. And so that's the thesis that I have, is we need to reset here as a country the kinds of investments we make and the kinds of things we're doing. And it's just so awesome to not be shouting into the void as I have in other parts of my life, but instead there's a great community of people who are about this. Given where the market is, given kind of with everything going on in the world, the next 2 years are going to be an amazing time for people who want to get into early stage technology and invest in real technology. We're investing in a bunch of companies that are fundamentally going to spend 2 years building amazing technology. So just like in 2008, people spent a couple of years building technology, and then you had Uber as an example, right? This is another moment like that. And I'm very fortunate to be able to play the role that I play and guide some of these investments. But I have to tell you, we're going to finish remaking the financial system over the next decade. And we're going to get rid of so much of the friction, so much of the analog, so much of the discrimination that's built into these systems, because it's, designed for 1956, and not designed for 2056. 2156, whatever, sometime in the future, right? And then we have to start moving manufacturing back here. We have to get the things that we use on a daily basis built in this country. And we are playing a hard game of catch up because we fundamentally haven't invested in this in 45 years. And we have to really get back to it. And, I don't want there to be a war, because that's the last time we got really good at it, because we had to reinvent our industrial base to support that war. And then we had all that manufacturing capability. We're like, well, okay, let's stop making planes and start making cars. Great. We made the biggest car market in the world. I don't want that to happen. So let's figure out a way to do it without a war.
Yeah, that'd be nice. That'd be very nice. You're touching on all the right topics, man. These are all the right sentiments. It's just great to see that, I think, being shared more and more by people in the country, right? I think, and on a bipartisan basis, I think there's more and more alignment on these kinds of topics. So that's always great to see. And if there's any way that we can follow you going forward, how could we do that? How should we do that?
Well, I'm if you can spell my name, it's pretty easy. First and last name, Twitter, LinkedIn, all the various things. I think I'm on almost every single platform at this point. It's such a distraction, all of these different platforms. But
except for TikTok?
No, I don't do TikTok or Snapchat. I tend not to do things that generally benefit the Chinese Communist Party directly. So yeah. So no, it's, Twitter or whatever, it's fine. I also have a Substack. That's probably moving forward the most interesting thing if you want to get a sense of how I'm thinking and where I'm spending energy. I just launched it, so it's early. I think I have like 8 subscribers. So
Awesome. Well, Sultan, thank you so much for coming on today. It was great having you, and I think you shared some amazing insights. We wish you all the best and hope to stay in touch.
Fantastic. Great to chat with you today, Alex, and love the podcast. Thanks for having me on.